My name is Olivia. I'm 29, and every Christmas I come home to a family that only knows how to praise my brother. No matter what I've done in life at that table, I am still the babysitter, still the girl who never measures up. Have you ever sat with people who should love you most only to feel invisible? This year I thought it would be the same. The jokes, the dismissals, the laughter at my expense. But one moment changed everything. What if the very thing they used to mock you for became the reason they finally had to see you? Stay with me. I promise. This story will make you think twice about your own worth. Snow-covered Boston that night, wrapping every rooftop and street lamp in white. Houses along my parents' neighborhood glowed with Christmas lights, wreaths hanging on polished doors. Their house stood brightest yellow light spilling through the windows, promising warmth that I wasn't sure was meant for me. I stood at the doorstep, my coat pulled tight. Every Christmas felt the same sweetness on the surface, dread underneath. The door opened before I knocked. My mother Margaret stood in her emerald dress, pearls at her neck. "Olivia, there you are. Take these appetizers to the living room, will you? And fill the glasses with water. Everyone's arriving any minute. No hug, no Merry Christmas, just orders." I nodded, slipped off my coat, and carried the platter inside. The dining room gleamed like a spread from a magazine turkey at the center. Mashed potatoes, glazed carrots, crystal glasses catching the chandelier's glow. But instead of belonging, I felt like a staff. The front door opened again. Daniel walked in as if the house were his stage. Rachel, his fiancée, glowed in a red silk dress, diamonds on her ears. Behind them came her parents, Edward and Eleanor, elegant in quiet, tailored wealth. The whole room shifted. Mom rushed forward to kiss Rachel's cheeks. Dad clapped Edward on the back. Their voices boomed with welcome. I stood to the side, tray in hand. Invisible. Then came the voice my cousin from near the fireplace. "Oh, Olivia's still on servant duty," light joking. But it cut sharp. A few chuckled before turning back to Daniel. No one defended me. Not my parents. Not Daniel. I forced a polite smile. Just helping out. I set the tray down, kept pouring water. My hands steady, my chest tight. Daniel smirked faintly. Rachel's face was unreadable. Edward and Eleanor exchanged glances, saying nothing. A little cousin tugged my sleeve. "You're like the helper, right? Can you bring me more cookies?" His tone was innocent, but the sting wasn't. I handed him one from the tray. "Sure." Even the children had learned my place here. From the living room, my aunt asked Rachel about her wedding dress. Eleanor offered names of designers in New York. Edward laughed about their trip to Aspen. Their voices filled the house, polished and proud. Meanwhile, I moved quietly, setting napkins, carrying glasses. My reflection in the kitchen window showed a black sweater, plain flat's hair tied back. I blended so well I could have been furniture. I set down the last glass and glanced at the tree in the corner. Gifts in glossy wrapping filled the floor. Tags read, "To Daniel," "To Rachel," "To Mom," "To Dad." Not one for me. I pressed my lips together, turned back to the table. Daniel's laugh rose above the chatter, smooth and confident. Everyone leaned closer, eager for his stories. I placed my glass down carefully, stood a little apart, and thought even here in the house where I grew up, I was still an outsider. And as I stood there, my mind drifted back to a different Christmas years ago when Daniel got his first bike. The whole family gathered around him, clapping, cheering, cameras flashing. I had unwrapped a set of sketchbooks that year, something I'd begged for. But no one noticed when I opened the box. I sat alone on the carpet while Daniel paraded around the room. The spotlight had always belonged to him. The memory faded as laughter roared again in the dining room. Daniel was retelling some story from his firm, and Rachel's parents leaned in, hanging on every word. Mom beamed, her face flushed with pride. Dad's glass was already raised. I smoothed the tablecloth where no one was sitting, straightening silverware that didn't need it. My hands needed a task, any task. The chandelier above sparkled, reflecting in every glass, making the room glow golden. Yet for me, that glow only deepened the shadows I stood in. A familiar ache pressed against my ribs. This wasn't home anymore. It was just a stage. A stage where Daniel starred, my parents applauded, and I played a role written for me long ago, background helper invisible. And I knew as the night stretched ahead, my part would not change. Dinner carried on like a stage play. Plates clinked silver, caught the light, conversation rose and fell in rhythm. And as always, everything revolved around Daniel. My father Charles raised his glass. To Daniel, our son, our pride. Youngest partner in his firm, thriving in New York, soon to marry into such a fine family. He is everything we dreamed of. Applause broke around the table. My mother Margaret leaned across to squeeze Rachel's hand. You've chosen so well, dear. Daniel has always been destined for great things. Rachel's cheeks flushed, her hand resting on Daniel's. He really is remarkable, she said softly. Cousin Jake lifted his glass. He's the role model of the family. If I were younger, I'd try to follow his path. That's success right there. The words landed like a verdict. I sipped my water. Its chill sharper than the wine around me. Glasses clinked in the candlelight. Only mine stayed plain. Daniel always had that spark, Eleanor added. Confidence you can't teach. Edward leaned forward. So where do you see yourself in 5 years, son? Running the office? Daniel grinned, leaning back. Expansion into Europe is on the horizon. I'd like to lead it. Admiration rippled around the table. Nods, murmurs, laughter. I sat folding my napkin flat again and again, as though it gave me purpose. A memory flickered, 16 years old, standing by this same tree. Dad bragged about Daniel making varsity. Mom chimed in about his scholarships. I just had a story published that week. I tried to say it. No one heard. Tonight was no different. Jake clapped Daniel's shoulder. Tell them about that case last spring, the $1 million win. Daniel retold it, perfectly practiced and sharp. The table roared with laughter at his punchline. I raised my glass of water, held it for a second, set it down quietly. Nobody noticed. Then Daniel leaned forward, smiling wide. We've set the date. Next spring. Martha's Vineyard. We're reserving the estate, flying in guests from all over. Gasps of approval. Spectacular, Eleanor whispered. Edward nodded firmly. A man like you deserves nothing less. Rachel squeezed his hand again, her diamond flashing. I tightened my grip on my glass eyes, fixed on the embroidered holly leaves in the tablecloth. Anything to look away. The talk spiraled from Daniel's career to Rachel's future role. She'll make such a perfect wife, Margaret gushed. Graceful, intelligent, from a wonderful family. Eleanor smiled at the praise. We've been blessed, truly. Daniel is a rare young man. It was as if Rachel had already been absorbed into the family portrait framed in gold. And me, I wasn't even in the picture. I leaned back slightly, listening. The words circled the table like polished ornaments, each one placed carefully to decorate Daniel's image. Even the younger cousins piped up, asking about law school, about living in New York, about what it takes. He answered each question like a celebrity giving interviews, generous and charming. The table laughed when he laughed. They nodded when he nodded. And in that laughter I caught something I'd learned long ago. Attention was currency here. Daniel had always been rich. I was perpetually broke. I remembered another Christmas freshman year of college. I'd come home with straight A's, proud of the work I'd poured into every paper. But that night, Dad only asked about Daniel's internship on Wall Street. Mom passed me a plate of ham, then turned back to Daniel's stories. My grades. My effort never made it into the toast. Now, years later, the pattern hadn't changed. The applause just sounded louder. The room grew even warmer as wine flowed freely, laughter spilling easier. My head buzzed faintly, not from alcohol, but from the noise, the imbalance, the weight of invisibility pressing down again. Admiration never lasted long. It always turned into something else. Jokes, little cuts dressed as humor, and I knew sitting in my quiet corner the night was only beginning. Dinner had reached that dangerous point when wine had loosened tongues, and laughter came quicker than good sense. Candles flickered, low shadows stretched long against the walls, and the air felt warmer, heavier, as though the house itself had drunk too much. I sat there, fork in hand, willing myself to fade into the wallpaper. But in this house, I never stayed invisible for long. Aunt Linda struck first. She leaned back in her chair, rings flashing like tiny spotlights. Her voice carried coated in wine and mischief. At least Olivia still has that babysitting gig. No fortune, no fame. But hey, she's kept her looks. The words landed sharp, disguised as humor. Laughter rolled around the table, not cruel at first, but sharp enough to sting. My fork froze mid-air. Eyes turned, waiting for my reaction, as if my discomfort was part of the evening's entertainment. I lifted my lips into a smile that didn't touch my eyes. I had learned long ago not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Rachel laughed lightly softer than the rest, her hand still resting in Daniel's. For just a moment her eyes flicked toward me, uncertain, then darted away. Even though she could feel the line wobble, she didn't speak. I drew breath, ready to redirect the conversation. I could mention a contract I had closed, a breakthrough my team had made, something, anything to remind them I was more than their favorite punchline. But my mother's voice cut in before I could form a syllable. "Oh, Olivia, don't start up about your little projects again. Tonight is about family, about the big things." Her hand waved casually in the air as if brushing away crumbs from the tablecloth. The gesture landed heavier than the words. Aunt Carol nodded in mock sympathy, her tone syrupy with condescension. I was a dreamer once too. Thought I'd change the world. But life has a way of teaching us to be practical. You'll figure it out, Olivia. Someday. The chuckles this time were quieter, indulgent, the kind reserved for children who don't know better. My jaw tightened, my fingers clamped around the fork until my knuckles burned. Inside, my voice screamed to cut through their laughter, to defend myself. Outside, I stayed still. The clatter of silverware filled the silence I left behind. Daniel leaned in slightly, his smile effortless, his tone light but edged. She's always reliable. Mom never has to worry when Olivia's around. She's a permanent staff member. A ripple of amusement spread, not loud but firm enough. Another cut, another label pinned in place. I swallowed the words burning at the back of my throat. I remembered Thanksgiving, Daniel arriving late, regaling them with his corporate victory, the table erupting in admiration. I had tried to share my own milestone. By the time the words left my mouth, no one was listening. My story had evaporated into the air. Tonight wasn't different. Tonight it was just louder. Then came the spill. Aunt Linda's elbow caught the pitcher, and a dark splash of red wine cascaded across the table, bleeding toward my plate. "Oh dear," she laughed. Olivia's in the danger zone. Napkins fluttered across the table toward each other. Not to me. Of course not to me. The expectation was clear I would take care of it. I pressed my jaw tight and reached forward, blotting at the spreading stain with careful, deliberate motions. Not one hand offered to help. Conversation picked back up around me, already moving on. Cleaning was my role after all. I caught Rachel's glance, then quick, fleeting. She had slipped her phone beneath the table, scrolling fast, her expression shifting. I couldn't see what she'd found, but her face flickered with something conflict, unease, before she set the phone down again. No one else noticed. The chatter swelled, circling back to Daniel. His career, his upcoming wedding, plans for Martha's Vineyard stories from his firm. Their voices overlapped, laughter growing until it swallowed the room. My fork felt heavy in my hand, as though it had absorbed the weight of every dismissal I'd endured. Finally, I set it down. Not gently. The sharp clang rang across the table. For a moment, the room paused. Heads turned. Glasses froze mid-air. My hands trembled slightly, but I held my face steady, my gaze fixed on no one in particular. The silence stretched long enough for me to taste it. Then someone coughed. Someone chuckled. Laughter trickled back, timid at first, then stronger, rising until it swept over me again, drowning my defiance. The clang became just another background noise in their memory. Daniel leaned toward Rachel, his voice pitched low, but not low enough. "She's always around. Reliable like furniture." Rachel shifted in her seat, her diamond ring catching the candlelight. She looked down quickly, as though avoiding the truth wrapped inside the joke. The laughter didn't roar this time. It trickled, a smaller cut, a quieter agreement. Somehow that stung more. because it meant the joke had already been accepted, folded into the fabric of who I was in their story. I pressed the edge of my napkin flat against the table, neat as a folded letter. My hands shook, but I forced them still. Around me the chatter climbed again, voices rising, circling Daniel like moths to a flame. And I sat there smiling a smile I didn't feel, my fork abandoned on the plate. Inside, the words I couldn't speak burned steadily. Even here in the house where I grew up, I was nothing more than an outsider. The dining room glowed with soft candlelight. Crystal glasses caught the flicker, sending shards of red and gold across the white tablecloth. Plates clinked as forks scraped the last of the turkey, voices rising with the looseness only wine could bring. By then, boundaries were blurred. Words carried harder edges. Laughter came too quick, too sharp. I sat between Aunt Carol and Cousin Jake, the chatter around me flowing like a tide. I let it wash past, steadying my breath, reminding myself that I could outlast it. I had done it every Christmas, but that night the tide was stronger, pulling me under. Daniel rose slowly from his chair, his wine glass and hand spoon tapping the rim he called the room to order. The sound carried light and commanding. Conversation hushed. All eyes turned toward him as if instinctively. He wore his smirk like a crown, the kind of grin that said he already owned the moment. Rachel's hand brushed his sleeve, steadying him as though she knew the performance by heart. To family, Daniel began. His voice was smooth, easy. The room leaned in, eager for what came next. Then his gaze swept across the table and landed squarely on me. His smirk deepened. And to Olivia, our loyal babysitter. Always dependable. Always here. Laughter erupted. Not the warm laughter that bonds people together, but the jagged kind that cuts. It echoed off the chandelier, rolled through the walls, and filled every corner of the room. My chest tightened. My hand gripped the stem of my glass until it pressed sharp against my palm. This wasn't a passing jab. This was a toast, a declaration, a label pinned to me for the entire family to celebrate. My father threw his head back, roaring with approval. His hand slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. Finally, he boomed. Someone said it out loud. His laughter thundered above the rest, sealing Daniel's words into family lore. The sound blurred, too loud, too heavy. I felt heat rise to my face, but I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just sat still, holding my glass like an anchor. Then came the voice of my cousin Josh, 17, hair falling into his eyes, eager for attention. "So, Olivia," he called out with a grin, "do babysitters get retirement plans, or do you just age out?" He laughed at his own joke before the others joined in. The table shook with it. Phones appeared then. Screens lit up blue in the dim room, cousins angling them slyly toward me, recording. Their laughter spilled into the microphones, framing me not as family, but as a spectacle. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was documented, preserved. I looked across the table at Rachel. She wasn't laughing. Her hand hovered near her phone, her thumb scrolling nervously. For a moment, her eyes almost met mine. Almost. Then she looked down again, retreating into silence. Inside, memories pressed hard against me. Last Christmas, Daniel had joked that I was born to be a waitress, handing out drinks like it was my calling. The year before, he mocked a pie I baked, calling it store-bought from a discount bin. Always a laugh, always a performance. Tonight was just louder, more polished, more permanent. The chandelier above gleamed cruelly, catching every glass, every smirk. I pressed the rim of my own glass against the table, steadying my hand. Then deliberately, I set it down. The click was sharp, cutting through their laughter. The room faltered. For one breath, the noise dimmed. Heads turned. Silence hovered at the edge of possibility. I lifted my eyes and locked them on Daniel. My stillness was louder than their voices. But silence never held in this house. Aunt Carol leaned toward her husband, whispering with a smirk. Someone repeated Josh's joke about retirement. Laughter bubbled up again, weaker this time, but still enough to drown me out. And then, my mother's voice, sugar wrapped around steel. Olivia, darling, she said, lifting her glass, as if to soften the cruelty. You really should think about starting your own family. That's what gives a woman true purpose. Her tone was gentle, almost affectionate, but the verdict was clear. Her words landed heavier than Daniel's. Laughter tumbled after them, lighter this time, polished like polite applause. I sat straighter, my smile tight. No tears, no plea, no outburst. Just silence. My silence had become my only weapon. The phones stayed up. Screens glowed. My cousins leaned close, whispering captions they thought were clever. Each second stretched preserved on digital film, my humiliation archived in pixels. Daniel lifted his glass again, his smirk wide, his voice carrying strong over the table. "Let's make it official," he said. "A toast to our babysitter, always there when we need her." Glasses lifted. Crystals clinked. The laughter roared. And I sat there smiling a smile that wasn't mine, my fork lying abandoned on the plate. Inside, my voice whispered, steady, cold, unshaken, "They will never see me. Not until I make them." The dining room had gone quieter, though not kinder. The turkey was carved down to Bones plates, pushed aside wine glasses leaning half empty in the candlelight. The air smelled of cinnamon gravy and the sharp edge of alcohol. It was that late hour of Christmas dinner when words grew looser, when truth slipped out dressed as jokes or advice. I sat with my napkin folded small in my lap, willing the night to end before it took another swing at me. But silence never lasted long in my family. My mother leaned forward, pearls glinting under the chandelier, her smile poised like a hostess on stage. "Olivia, sweetheart," she said sweetly but with enough volume for the table to hear, "you should really start thinking about marriage. You're almost 30. A woman can't wait forever." Her voice was light, almost playful. But to me the words landed heavier than the wine glasses scattered across the table. A few chuckled, nodding as if it was practical wisdom. And then came my cousin Jake, always quick to pile on. He tipped his glass toward me, grinned, smug and lazy. "She's right, Liv. Stability is everything. Time to stop drifting and think practical." His tone carried the arrogance of someone who still lived off his father's money. Yet the table chuckled again, their laughter easy, unbothered. I tried to breathe evenly, my fingers pressing hard into my knees beneath the table. Part of me wanted to answer, to tell them about the company I had built brick by brick, about the employees whose families I supported, about the milestones that had cost me sleep and years. But just as I drew breath to speak, my father's voice cut through. "Men," he said, tapping the table for emphasis, "want women who can care for a family. Not someone chasing careers that don't put food on the table. Dreams fade. Family lasts." The authority in his tone carried weight. He didn't glance at me when he said it. He didn't need to. The words boxed me in like he'd written the rulebook of my life and signed his name across the cover. I opened my mouth again, desperate this time, but Eleanor, Rachel's mother, stepped in smoothly, her voice carrying the practiced ease of someone used to polite dismissals. "Well," she said with a gracious smile, "everyone finds their path eventually. Some just take a little longer to bloom." The chuckle that followed was softer, genteel, polished. Yet the sting went deeper than Jake's crude remarks. Wrapped in silk, the words still struck like a whip. And just when I thought the moment might pass, Aunt Linda leaned forward, eager to add her piece. "I married at 24, she announced, patting her husband's hand with pride. "I never regretted it. Olivia, you don't want to wait too long. You'll run out of options." This time, the laughter rolled down the table like a wave. My younger cousin Josh snickered, his teenage voice cracking. "Maybe Aunt Olivia's just waiting for a prince on a white horse," he teased. Phones glowed again at the far end of the table. Someone whispered, not quietly enough, "Or maybe she's scared no one wants to marry her." The laughter burst louder. I felt it hit me like a cold wind. My body stayed still, but inside I was shaking. A memory rushed back 5 years ago in this very dining room. I had tried to explain my little startup, nervous but hopeful. Dad had chuckled and called it a cute hobby before turning back to Daniel's latest promotion. I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt. Tonight felt like the same script, only rewritten with sharper edges and a bigger audience. The noise carried on. Daniel smirked, enjoying his silent spotlight. Rachel stayed quiet, but her eyes darted nervously, her hand tightening around her glass. I saw it, but no one else cared to notice. I picked up my napkin slowly, folded it once, twice, neat and deliberate. Then I set it down beside my plate. The faint whisper of fabric against china cut through the chatter more than I expected. For the first time that night, the room hesitated. I looked around the table, my smile tight, my voice even. "Thank you," I said softly. "I'll remember all this advice." The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was sharp. Even the candles seemed to flicker and pause. Then Daniel laughed, loud, sudden, breaking the moment like glass shattering on tile. He leaned back in his chair, pointing lightly in my direction. "Classic Olivia," he said, his grin wide. "Always so polite. Always pretending to take notes. You should write a book of advice columns." The table roared again. Laughter filled every corner of the room, bigger, louder, until my measured words vanished under their noise. I stayed still, hands folded neatly in my lap. My face is calm, my body composed. But inside, the truth pressed firm and clear. They didn't just doubt me. They needed me to stay small. They needed me to play the role of failure, so Daniel's light could shine brighter against my shadow. And in that silence of my own mind, I knew something else. The story they told about me, the one they had repeated year after year, was about to end. Because in just a few minutes, everything they believed about me would shatter. The conversation had drifted back to wedding plans, voices buoyant with wine. Rachel leaned toward her mother, her phone already in hand. "I have to show you the dress," she said, eyes glowing. Her tone was bright enough to pull attention down both sides of the table. People leaned in, expectant. I watched her swipe across the screen, the reflection of sequins and chandeliers dancing in her pupils. I braced myself for silk lace, something delicate that would spark another round of applause for Daniel's charmed life. But instead, her hand stilled. The air shifted with it. Her phone lit up with a different image, one she hadn't meant to reveal. A magazine cover. My face. My posture. Straight arms crossed in confidence, the bold blue background behind me. Across the top, Forbes. Rachel froze. Her painted smile faltered, and a faint crease appeared between her brows. For a heartbeat, she tried to swipe past it, but her fingers shook. "Wait," she whispered, voice no louder than the hum of the chandelier. "Is this—" You, Eleanor, seated nearest, leaned in with a frown. "Rachel." "What is that?" Her hand, steady moments earlier, now clutched her wine stem too tightly. Edward craned his neck, his chair scraping back just slightly. "Let me see," he said, his tone uneasy. Rachel turned the phone toward them. The light spilled across their faces, revealing an expression I had seen only in strangers: shock, disbelief, the dawning sense that they had missed something enormous. Down the table, one of my cousins caught sight of the glow. "What is it?" he asked, leaning forward. Rachel didn't answer. She simply pushed the phone farther into the center, where more pairs of eyes fell on it all at once. The whisper started low. "That's Olivia," one voice muttered. "No way." Another cousin tilted her head, blinking hard. "But she was just—" Each murmur spread the truth faster than any announcement could have. The laughter that had dominated the evening thinned out, replaced by a heavy quiet that pressed down like snow on a roof. Daniel was the last to look. His fork hovered midair, the bite forgotten. When his eyes finally landed on the screen, I saw the moment the smirk drained from his face. The certainty he wore so easily cracked like porcelain under strain. "No," he muttered. "This can't be right." Rachel's voice shook as she read the headline aloud, her eyes never leaving the glowing screen. "AI Visionary of the Year, Olivia Grant, CEO of Novamind Technologies." The words struck the room harder than any outburst. Eleanor gasped softly, her hand flying to her pearls. Edward leaned back, his jaw tightening. One cousin covered his mouth, eyes darting between the phone and me as though I'd been replaced by a stranger. I didn't move. I didn't need to. My hands rested neatly in my lap, and I let the silence do what years of my own words never could. Inside, my mind flickered back to the day that photograph was taken. The studio lights, the click of the camera, the editor shaking my hand and saying, "You'll want to remember this." I smiled politely, thinking of no one but myself at that moment. And now here it was, my face, my story thrust into this dining room like a live wire. Daniel finally found his voice, brittle and broken. This has to be a mistake. Some kind of look-alike. It's accurate," I said, my tone even. The words landed like a gavel. The chandelier above flickered slightly, the only sound in a room that had gone utterly still. Then Eleanor's glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the hardwood, the shards scattering near her chair. No one moved to clean it. No one dared. For years, their silence had been a prison. Tonight, for the first time, it was mine to command. The dining room felt heavy, the air thick with wine and leftover laughter. Wedding chatter still lingered. Rachel had been scrolling on her phone, ready to show a photo of her dress. I saw her thumb flick across the screen, her face bright with anticipation. Then she froze. Her smile faltered, the glow in her eyes replaced by something sharper. Her brow furrowed as she leaned closer to the screen. "Wait," she whispered, just loud enough for those near her to hear. Eleanor tilted her head. "What is it, darling?" Rachel didn't answer right away. Her lips parted, her breath catching. Slowly, as though her hands had gone weak, she turned the phone around for the table to see. The image glowed in the dim light. A magazine cover, bold letters stretching across the top. My photograph beneath them. "I Visionary of the Year." The headline read, "Olivia Grant, 29, founder and CEO of Novamind Technologies, IPO valuation, $3.5 billion. Net worth, $5.8 billion. Acquisition of MedTech, $1 billion." Her voice trembled as she read each line out loud. She didn't rush. Each number seemed to land like a stone dropping into still water. At the far end of the table, a glass slipped from Eleanor's hand and shattered against the floor. The crash sliced through the silence, but no one moved to clean it. Every eye was fixed on me. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hiss of the candle wick struggling to stay lit. I didn't speak. Not yet. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. He leaned forward, his words breaking uneven. "No. No, this isn't right." His voice grew louder, desperate. "This can't be real. Liv, what is this?" I met his eyes, steady, unblinking. "It's accurate." The silence thickened. Chairs creaked as people shifted, uncomfortable but unable to look away. Dad's face was drained of color. His mouth opened as if to form a question, but nothing came out. He had always been the voice of authority in this house, but now he sat muted, undone by a single headline. Mom's napkin fluttered from her fingers, landing on the table like a white flag. She whispered my name softer than I had ever heard her say it. Rachel's hand shook as she held the phone higher, as if showing proof to a jury. You're the CEO of Novamind," her voice cracked mid-sentence. I didn't flinch. "Yes." Jake, always quick with a joke, stared at the screen like it betrayed him. "That can't know Forbes must have." He stopped himself. His usual smirk had disappeared. Across the table, I caught the reflection of glowing screens. A few cousins had already pulled out their own phones, fingers typing fast, checking for themselves. The silence fractured into murmurs. Disbelief bleeding into awe. "It says here she was named AI Visionary of the Year." Rachel continued, her voice steadier now as she scrolled down. "She bought MedTech for $1.5 billion. Novamind is, oh my God, it says it's one of the most successful IPOs of the decade." The words didn't sound like hers anymore. She was just the messenger reading out facts too sharp to be ignored. Daniel slammed his hand against the table, his composure gone. "Stop reading that. It's exaggerated. It's..." His voice cracked and the protest fell flat. Edward, Rachel's father, leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. This is extraordinary." His voice was hushed, reverent almost. Novamind belongs to you, yes. Murmurs rose again. Cousins exchanging whispers, aunts leaning closer to one another, hands covering mouths. It was strange watching the story shift in real time. For years I had been the background character, the helper, the easy target. And now, with one headline, the roles had inverted. But I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, hands folded, still as stone. The silence stretched until it no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. Daniel broke it again, but weaker this time. You're lying. You've been hiding behind babysitting jobs, odd little projects. You expect us to believe I don't expect anything, I cut in my voice, calm. You don't have to believe me. Forbes already did. His mouth snapped shut. He looked at Rachel, at his fiancée, who was still staring at me with wide eyes, the phone trembling in her grip. For the first time in my life, Daniel had nothing left to say. I leaned back slightly, breathing slow. The weight of the evening, of years of small humiliations, shifted off my shoulders. They had built a story about me for decades. Tonight it had collapsed under its own lies. The chandelier above flickered its crystals, scattering light across the table. No one touched their plates. No one laughed. Even Josh, the teenage cousin who had been so eager with his jokes earlier, sat stunned, his phone forgotten in his hand. I had not raised my voice. I had not demanded recognition. I had only spoken 4 words. And yet for the first time at this table, every eye was on me. The silence belonged to me now. The air in the dining room shifted. It wasn't loud anymore. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the chatter that had carried the night, it all drained out like someone had pulled the plug. What replaced it was silence, heavy and unsteady, pressing down on every corner of the table. Edward Pierce was the first to break it. He leaned forward, squinting at Rachel's phone as though his eyes alone could decide if the image was real. Novamind. His voice trailed off, then steadied. That company, it's actually yours. I folded my hands on the table, my movements calm, measured. Yes, I said simply. Across from me, Cousin Jake fumbled with his phone. His face lit blue under the glow of the screen as his thumbs worked fast. Hold on, he muttered, half to himself. Let's just check. His eyes widened, his jaw slack. Holy, she's everywhere. Forbes, CNBC, TechCrunch. The IPO valuation is right here, $3.5 billion. He looked up at me, then back down at the screen, as if repeating it would make it easier to believe. It says you acquired MedTech for $1.5 billion. Gasps circled the table. Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest, but said nothing, her composure slipping just enough for everyone to notice. Daniel laughed suddenly, the sound sharp and brittle. This is ridiculous. His fork clattered against his plate as he set it down too hard. A lucky investment, maybe. Some tech bubble. Anyone can ride the wave if they're in the right place at the right time. I tilted my head slightly, my voice steady. Luck doesn't write a 2,000-page patent portfolio. His mouth opened, then closed again. No words came. Rachel was still holding her phone, but now her hands trembled. She stared at the screen, then lifted her gaze to me. Her expression was torn, part disbelief, part awe, part something softer, almost guilty. For the first time all night she looked at me like I wasn't just Daniel's sister, but someone she hadn't taken the time to know. Around the table the murmurs grew. Aunt Carol leaned over to her husband, whispering too loudly. How could she keep this a secret? He shrugged his eyes, darting from me to the glowing screen as though unsure which reality to believe. Jake, still scrolling, read aloud like he was narrating a story for the room. Olivia Grant named AI Visionary of the Year. Novamind Technologies leading breakthroughs in medical imaging. Recognized for reshaping early diagnostics. Holy crap! He sat back stunned. The words floated over the table, undeniable now. My family's disbelief cracked under the weight of evidence they couldn't laugh away. Daniel shifted in his chair, his smirk struggling to hold. If this were true, why wouldn't you say anything? Why sit here letting us think? His voice broke off. I met his eyes. I didn't let you think anything. You assumed. The silence that followed was deeper than before. No one laughed this time. No one filled it with chatter. The weight of my words settled over them like dust impossible to sweep away. Eleanor cleared her throat, trying to reclaim the room with her polished tone. Well, she began softly, her voice diplomatic but shaky. This is certainly surprising. Quite an accomplishment. But the praise landed hollow. Her earlier words, "Some people bloom late," hung in the air, exposing themselves for what they were. Rachel finally spoke, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I looked at her, then at the rest of them. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "Because you never asked." Mom's napkin slipped from her lap, falling to the floor. She bent to pick it up, but her hands trembled too much to grip the fabric. Dad sat rigid, staring at me as though the shape of me had changed in front of his eyes. Inside, my thoughts were steady. For years I had been erased at this table, written out of my own story. Tonight, without raising my voice, I had written myself back in. But as I glanced around the table, I realized something else. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about them, their disbelief, their unease, their scramble to rewrite a narrative that had finally broken apart. Edward leaned back, crossing his arms. "If this is true," he said slowly, "then you're being called one of the most successful women in tech today." He looked at his wife, then at Daniel, then back at me. His tone shifted, calculating. "Quite a position of power. Doors must be opening everywhere for you." It was subtle, but I heard it, the shift from dismissal to opportunity. Already he was considering what my success might mean for him, for Rachel, for their family name. I held his gaze for a long moment before answering. "The doors that opened for me," I said, "were the ones I built myself." He didn't reply. The table sat in silence again, thick and uneasy. Phones buzzed faintly as cousins scrolled their screens, reflecting the same images, the same headlines, the same undeniable truth. Daniel's face was pale now, his earlier flush drained away. He gripped his wine glass but didn't drink. His lips moved as though rehearsing a rebuttal he couldn't find. For the first time in my life, I watched my brother without the shield of confidence he'd always carried. Rachel placed her phone down slowly, almost reverently, as though the screen itself had become too heavy to hold. She whispered, "It's all true." The words echoed through the room, and then the silence belonged to me. The dining room felt like a different world than it had an hour ago. No more laughter, no more careless jokes tossed around like confetti. The air was heavy, pressing down on every glass, every plate. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, while the people who once dismissed me scrambled for a new script. It was my mother who broke first. Her lips trembled and her eyes glossed as if tears alone could rewrite history. "Olivia," she whispered, voice fragile. "We're so proud of you." The words hung there, too polished, too sudden. I looked at her for a long moment. My jaw tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "Are you?" She blinked, startled. "Of course we are." I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady on hers. "Would you be proud if I had 50,000 in the bank instead of 5 billion? Would you be proud if Forbes hadn't told you to be?" The silence that followed was brutal. Every fork stilled, every breath caught. My father shifted in his chair, but no words came. Around the table, no one dared laugh. Dad finally cleared his throat, his voice rough, trying to reclaim control. "Now, Olivia, there's no need to turn this into what I cut in, an argument or just a mirror you don't want to look into." The sharpness of my words sliced through whatever authority he thought he still had. He shut his mouth, his face red with something between shame and anger. From the far side, Edward forced a chuckle, his businessman's mask sliding into place. "Well," he said, "tone too smooth. If your company ever needs a consultant in real estate, I'd be happy to help." His smile was all polished opportunity, his eyes already calculating how my success could be folded into his world. I turned my head toward him slowly, my expression neutral. "We already own the building our headquarters is in," I said. My voice was even, but the dismissal was absolute. His mouth twitched. He looked down at his glass. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. her tears slipping easily into the performance of regret. "We never meant to belittle you, Olivia. Families don't always know how to show pride, but we—" I raised a hand, gently stopping her. "You knew exactly how to show pride. I've watched you do it for Daniel my whole life. Don't tell me you didn't know how." Her lips parted, but no words came. Rachel, silent until now, stared down at her hands. Her engagement ring caught the candlelight, casting small flecks of brilliance across the tablecloth. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet. "Olivia," she said softly, "I didn't know." I met her gaze, holding it, letting the weight of years sit between us. My voice dropped steady and cold. "I know. That's the point." The room froze again. The silence this time wasn't disbelief. It was recognition. Every person at that table felt it, the shift in power, the unraveling of the story they'd written about me. Cousin Jake broke the stillness with a nervous laugh. "Well, I mean, hey, at least you're still family, right?" He tried to sound light, but the joke fell flat, hanging in the air like smoke. Nobody laughed with him. My father rubbed his forehead, avoiding my eyes. My mother sat trembling, her napkin twisted in her hands. Edward kept his glass raised but didn't drink. Eleanor's lips pressed tight, her earlier condescension now swallowed. And Daniel sat stiff in his chair, his jaw clenched so tight the muscle twitched. He hadn't spoken since my confirmation. His silence screamed louder than any words could. I let the stillness stretch, let them sit in it. For once I didn't rush to fill the silence with politeness or reassurance. I stayed exactly where I was, calm and unwavering, while their discomfort grew. It hit me then they weren't proud. They weren't sorry. They were afraid. Afraid of what the truth about me meant for the story they'd told themselves for years. That Daniel was the success, that I was the afterthought, the helper, the babysitter. That story is dead now. And they knew it. Rachel's voice broke the silence again, barely above a whisper. "I should have asked." I studied her carefully. "Yes," I said softly. "You should have." Her face flushed, and she dropped her gaze back to her hands. The air was thick with everything left unsaid. I leaned back in my chair, finally breathing freely, watching the room that had once defined me struggle to catch up to who I had become. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. The dining room had gone quiet, too quiet. Dessert sat untouched at the far end of the table, pumpkin pie, pecan, chocolate cake, all perfect, all ignored. Forks rested still on china plates, wine glasses half full, the sparkle of the chandelier now harsh instead of festive. The air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel leaned close to Rachel, whispering fast, sharp words I couldn't catch. His jaw was tight, his face flushed. Rachel shook her head once, then again more firmly before standing. She walked to the kitchen, her heels clicking against the hardwood, never looking back. The sound of a door swinging shut echoed like a verdict. Daniel's hand gripped the table, knuckles pale. He muttered something under his breath, then pushed his chair back roughly. "Unbelievable," he said louder, his voice cracking the silence. He wasn't talking about Rachel. He was talking about me. I sat still, my napkin folded neatly on my lap. The smell of cinnamon wine and roast turkey still hung in the air, but it all seemed distant, muted. I had spent years waiting for this family to see me, to hear me. And in one night, they had. But the truth hadn't set me free. It had unsettled them, threatened the story they clung to. Mom cleared her throat, her voice wobbling. "Liv, maybe we should all just calm down. Sit, eat dessert. It's Christmas." I rose slowly from my chair. The scrape of the legs against the hardwood made everyone flinch. I laid my napkin down carefully, as though the gesture needed ceremony. My voice was steady, even quiet, but it carried across the table. "I think that's enough for tonight." Dad's head snapped up. His face was flushed from wine, but his tone was commanding, the way it always was. "Olivia, sit down. Don't make a scene." A low laugh escaped me, humorless and sharp. "I didn't make this scene, Dad. You did. Every year since I was old enough to sit at this table, you've made it." The words landed hard, like stones dropped in water. No one spoke. Even Daniel froze his hand tightening around his glass, but not lifting it. I took a breath, steadying my hands against the back of my chair. You wanted me small so I nodded toward Daniel could stay big. You needed me invisible so his spotlight stayed bright. That wasn't my choice. That was yours. Margaret reached for me, her hand hovering above the table. Olivia, sweetheart? I shook my head. Don't! Her hand fell back. The silence thickened, pressing against my skin. For a moment, no one moved. It was like they were waiting, hoping I'd laugh, sit back down, say I didn't mean it. But I stayed standing. Finally, Daniel slammed his glass down. Red wine splashed onto the tablecloth, seeping into the embroidered holly leaves. You're unbelievable, he spat. You think you're better than us now? Because you got lucky with some tech fad. You've always been dramatic, Liv. Always. I turned toward him fully, my voice calm, cutting through his anger. I'm not a babysitter anymore, Daniel. And I'm not the shadow of your success. You don't get to define me. The words hung in the air, cold and final. I walked to the coat rack by the door. My boots clicked softly against the wood. The sound somehow louder than all the laughter earlier in the night. I slid into my coat, pulled on my gloves. Behind me, chairs shifted, breaths caught, but no one stopped me. When I opened the door, the cold hit me like a wave, clean, sharp, real. Snowflakes drifted from the dark sky, catching in the porch light, falling slow and steady. I stepped out, the crunch of fresh snow under my boots, anchoring me to the moment. Behind me, Daniel's voice rose again, strained, furious. Walk away, Liv. Just like always. I stopped on the porch, turned just enough so he could see my face through the doorway. My breath fogged in the freezing air, but my words were clear. I'm not walking away. I'm walking out. There's a difference. For a moment, the only sound was the wind pushing through the trees, rattling the icicles hanging from the roof. Then I added, softer, steady enough to carry, I'm not your babysitter anymore. Daniel froze in the doorway, his mouth open but no words coming. I turned back, stepping into the snow. The night swallowed me whole, the cold air a relief after the suffocating heat of that dining room. Each step I took down the walkway felt lighter, like I was shedding years of silence, years of being the family's convenient shadow. The laughter from earlier still echoed in my memory, sharp and cruel. But now, with snow falling steady, each flake catching the light, it felt distant, like an old story I no longer belonged to. I reached my car, brushed the snow from the windshield, and slid inside. The leather was cold, the steering wheel colder, but my hands didn't shake. For the first time that night, I wasn't bracing myself. I wasn't small. I wasn't silent. I wasn't theirs. As I started the engine, headlights cut across the street, scattering snowflakes into silver sparks. I glanced once at the house glowing behind me, voices muffled now by distance and walls. And then I looked forward, shifted into gear and pulled away. The house shrank in the rearview mirror. The road stretched ahead, empty, waiting. And with every mile I drove, I knew I hadn't lost my family tonight. I had finally stepped free of them. The city was quieter than I'd ever seen it. Boston at midnight, wrapped in snow, looked almost tender. Street lamps glowed through the flurries, the kind of glow that softened the sharp edges of the world. My car was parked by the curb, engine off, but I hadn't moved. I sat there with my coat still on, hands folded, just listening to the silence after the storm of that dinner. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't need to check the name. I knew. Daniel. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. The house we'd both grown up in was only blocks away, and yet it felt like another lifetime. Finally, I swiped and answered. His voice came through before I even said hello. Liv. It cracked slightly, like it hadn't done in years. We're family. Don't do this. I leaned back in my seat, the leather cold against my shoulders. Do it, Daniel. You know what? You're humiliating everyone. You've turned us into villains in our own house. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I let the silence stretch. My breath fogged against the window's soft circles that vanished as quickly as they came. You think this is funny, he pushed. Rachel's upset. Mom's crying. Dad looks like he aged 10 years in an hour. And you? His voice hardened. You sat there like you wanted this. Like you wanted to destroy us. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. I didn't need to destroy you, Daniel. You did that yourselves. For once he had no comeback. Just the faint sound of him breathing uneven. You've changed, he finally muttered. No, I said quietly. You just never knew me. The snow outside fell heavier, tapping against the windshield. I thought of all the Christmases before this one, the way I'd carried plates, poured water, smiled through their jokes. All the years of silence of being cast as the family's cautionary tale. And all the while I was building something they couldn't even imagine. You always wanted this, Daniel said, suddenly, bitterness rising. You always wanted to outshine me. I closed my eyes. His words weren't new. They were recycled, the same refrain he'd sung since we were kids. But tonight they sounded weaker, stripped of conviction. No, Daniel, I said. My voice didn't waver. I just wanted you to stop standing in my light. There it was. The truth between us finally spoken. On his end, silence again. I pictured him jaw tight, pacing the kitchen wine still on the counter. The perfect sun the star suddenly cast in a shadow he couldn't erase. My phone buzzed again, this time with a new message. I glanced at the screen. It was Nora, my assistant. Christmas dinner reveal is trending. I let out a soft breath. Of course it was. Those little phones held by cousins, by aunts who thought they were filming harmless fun, they had captured everything. The toasts, the jokes, the cruel laughter. And now the world was watching the same show I had endured for years. I imagined the comments, the headlines, the ripple effect. My humiliation had always been their private sport. Not anymore. Daniel's voice broke back and brittle. You're really going to let this play out online. You're going to let strangers laugh at us. I almost smiled. You didn't care when the laughter was at my expense. Why should I protect you now? That's different, he snapped. Your family. Exactly, I said. Family should have been the ones to protect me first. He went quiet. For the first time in years, I felt the power shift. It wasn't loud or triumphant. It was steady, like the ground finally firm beneath me. You'll regret this, he muttered at last, his voice stripped of its earlier bravado. Someday you'll regret cutting us out. I looked at the snow falling endless and calm. Maybe, I said softly, but regret is lighter than carrying the weight of your approval. The line went still, no sound but static. I held the phone a second longer, then lifted it away from my ear. Good night, Daniel, I whispered and pressed the end. The screen went dark. The car was silent again, save for the faint hiss of the heater. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the streets, softening the noise of a city that never truly slept. I slipped my phone into my bag, leaned back and let the quiet fill me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for their laughter to fade, or for their judgment to ease. The only sound that mattered was the steady rhythm of my own breath. They had needed me to stay small so Daniel could shine. But tonight, finally, I had stepped out from under that shadow, and I wasn't going back. Snow was still falling when I stepped back into my apartment. The city was quiet beneath its white blanket, streetlights glowing like muted lanterns. My coat still carried the chill from outside, but the space around me felt warmer than it had in years. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't need more noise. Instead, I walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and looked out across Boston. From up here, the skyline looked softer, almost forgiving, every rooftop traced in silver. My phone buzzed on the counter. Then again, and again. The vibration echoed through the room like a restless heartbeat. Notifications piled up faster than I could glance at them. News outlets. Stock updates. Mentions tagged with my name. Novamind's shares had surged overnight. Screenshots from Forbes were everywhere. And alongside them, a different clip had begun to circulate, the one my young cousin had filmed earlier in the evening. The video of me being laughed at, Daniel's voice sharp as he called me the family babysitter. Side by side with that, my Forbes cover stared back at the world like a perfect rebuttal. Christmas dinner. Reveal was trending. I picked up the phone, scrolled briefly, then set it back down. I didn't feel the need to read every headline. I already knew the story. For years they had told the world who I was. Tonight, the truth had finally spoken for itself. The screen lit up with another call. This time it wasn't a journalist. It was my parents. Their names glowed together side by side, as if the two of them had rehearsed this moment, deciding who would say what. I let it ring. For the first time in my life, I felt no guilt for not answering, no weight pulling me back toward their approval. Instead, I poured a glass of wine, carried it to the window, and watched the flakes swirl under the streetlight. My reflection looked back at me in the glass, steadier now, no longer blurred by years of dismissal. Another buzz. A message this time. From Nora, my assistant. The press wants a statement. Do you want me to draft one? I typed back one word. No. There was nothing more to say. The city glowed beneath the falling snow. Somewhere across the skyline, I could see the faint outline of Novamind's headquarters, our logo lit up in neon blue. A reminder that what I had built was real. It didn't vanish just because my family failed to see it. I thought of every Christmas before this one. Every dinner where I had been handed plates instead of praise. Every year when Daniel's stories filled the air while mine were left unsaid. And now, without me uttering a word, the balance had shifted. They had needed me small so they could feel large, but the truth had grown too big to be ignored. The phone buzzed again. More messages. More calls. My parents. Daniel. Unknown numbers flashing with urgency. I silenced the device, set it face down, and leaned against the glass. I whispered softly, almost as if I were telling it to the city itself, they needed me to be the babysitter. But I was never theirs to define. I lifted the glass of wine, raised it toward my own reflection, and let the silence stretch. Not vengeance, not even vindication, just freedom. And in that quiet, I realized I didn't need their recognition to shine. I never had. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told you'd never be enough, remember this. Your value doesn't come from their approval. It comes from knowing who you are, even when no one else sees it. Success isn't revenge. It's freedom. I took a sip, set the glass down, and let the city lights carry the rest. The snow didn't stop that night. It kept falling steady and endless, as if the world wanted to erase every footprint left behind. I sat by the window phone, silent beside me, and for once the quiet felt like mine. No expectations, no comparisons, just stillness. By morning, my name wasn't just at my family's table anymore, it was everywhere. News anchors debated the video. Strangers argued in comment sections. Headlines carried my face alongside the word visionary. Yet through it all, I sat in my apartment watching the snow pile higher on the balcony, untouched by the noise. It struck me then, karma doesn't need an announcement. I hadn't lifted a finger, hadn't written a single word to defend myself. The truth had walked into that dining room on its own, and once it was out, there was no taking it back. My family had wanted the world to see me small. Instead, the world saw exactly how large their silence had made me. And that's the part I want you to hold on to. The shift didn't come from revenge, or even from their recognition. It came the moment I stopped waiting for it. The moment I realized my worth was never theirs to measure. So if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told you weren't enough, remember this: success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about living so fully that their approval becomes irrelevant. That's not revenge. That's freedom.